Hey guys, welcome to the MC Anime Podcast. We cover anime, geek culture, Japanese aesthetics, and Asian studies. We are a multi-fandom podcast, and you can expect to hear topics in your favorite hobby or fandom activity potentially. You can find MC Anime on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Also, please check out mcanimepodcast.com, our website. Furthermore, stay tuned in for another episode.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of MC Anime After Dark. Today we're back with Steven. Hey Steven, how's it going?
I'm fine. You finally got around to actually recording this for once.
Yeah, I'm recording with you, unfortunately. But yeah, today's topic. You don't know Steven. He's a cooking specialist, has a hospitality background, and loves dark history moments. So today we're going to be discussing the dark history of Vietnam War. But what do you think was the political catalyst for starting this war in the first place?
The what? What part of the war?
How do you think the Vietnam War started? And why is it so dark?
The Vietnam War started as a political war. Let's be honest. It was because that the United States felt that they should be helping out the South Vietnamese. And that was the only reason we got into it. And it was the administration at the time's bad decision. And we were thrusted into Vietnam. The war that we should not be in.
Yeah.
But you're going to focus on the dark history of it. So before you get into Agent Orange, which is a vegetation disease that was awfully used, the Vietnam War also encompassed darkness of mutilation sexually, mass killings, sex trafficking. There's a lot in the background going on. But the Agent Orange that I know you say you want to cover is a vegetation biological weapon.
Alright, so with the dark history surrounding the war, why did some things go unseen and other stuff not be pulled to the forefront? Like, for example, one side pushing this agenda but hiding this other thing happening.
What, the difference in the two sides?
Well, you have the politicals basically preparing the conflict forward, but then you have all the other hidden journeys along the way that are also dark but just hidden.
Which side do you want to talk about? We could talk about North Vietnamese and their history.
Let's start with the North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese. What started that conflict for us?
Yeah. Like I said, the Vietnam War was started between territorial control of the South and the Vietnam border, North and South Vietnam border. The U.S. was rushed in or forced into a war we didn't want to do to protect the South. Part of the North, they were starting to try to overtake territories that the South controlled by use of guerrilla tactics, biological warfare, torturing, and of course the standard issue guns.
And why do you think there was so much dark history involved in this war?
Like I said, some of the dark histories were the massacres.
It's so much dark history. What element is like probably the most present for the dark history to exist?
Like, what is the worst dark history to Vietnam War?
Prevailing element that made the dark history occur.
A major element was a combination of all the different deaths that happened, not even just the United States, but the civilians caught in it, the people in the villages that were just trying to live their life, massacred and killed. And the massacres were less about the North. A lot of American soldiers were killing villages because they thought they were in league with the North Vietnam. So think about this. You talk about dark, right? Think about whole villages being murdered, and you wouldn't call that dark. Just murdered because they're living their life and they may be connected to the North Vietnamese. So rather than figuring that out, you have units of soldiers, our soldiers, going around massacring whole villages on the off chance that one of their residents was connected to the North Vietnamese. Just one. Then you add on the vegetation disease, where they were using a biological weapon targeted at the forest to destroy the vegetation that the North Vietnamese were using as cover. So Agent Orange would eventually kill all the vegetation so the enemy had nowhere to hide. Now those are some dark times. Killing of wildlife, vegetation, people, and the list goes on. You want to talk about dark, that's pretty dark to me, especially the murder.
And was there a particular side that had the better control over the course of the war? Or was it just the influx of other help from other people?
I would say it's a tri-influx because every side had their problems and none really had control over it. Because the more control the South Vietnamese would get, or us, the more that the North Vietnamese would push against us. So let's say even if we got control, they would push against us and we would lose control. And then it would fluctuate on their side or South Vietnam. So no real side had a lot of control.
Oh, okay. So what is the turning point in which the side that got control later?
Some major turning points were massacre. You can't shit on the history books will. History books do not cover the small aspects of that war. They focus on the battles. What about the killing and the murdering behind the battles?
What about it?
But think about it. Talk about dark. Okay, if you are not educated on the Vietnam War, you're immediately going to think in school, oh, the major battles. You know, the fire bases and everything. But what about the small villages killed? Are those not dark times?
Well, yeah.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let's picture you. You're in the Vietnam and you're during the war. You're sitting in your little house like you are right now. And a bunch of American soldiers come into the village only on the belief that one of you, of all the 7 huts, might be connected to North Vietnam. But they don't know who. They just know it's in the village. So they grab all of everybody, including you, out of your chair, throw you in the middle where the garden is, in the middle of the town. They have you all stand up and tie your hands. And then if it's not that bad, they pull out their M16s and just shoot you all. No questions. No, any why? Because half of the soldiers couldn't speak the language. And rather than find somebody that could, they just decide to murder the whole village. Because one of them might be reporting to the North Vietnamese army.
So why was
you
the American army military occupation so desperate to end the struggle, even to that?
They were so unprepared for this war, and the average officer could not speak a foreign language like they're required to do today. They were thrown in right out of college. Officers had to have a degree. And they were thrown into a combat unit. And their orders were to seek out spies, people that might be connected to the Vietnam War that were going to hurt our side. But in doing that, they had a standing order. Wait a minute, where'd you go?
Right here.
They had a standing order to kill anybody they believed was related to the North. Because you got to remember, we're on the South side. But here's the thing, what's to stop or say that the same village they murdered, there's not a South Vietnamese in there? So think about it. They're massacring the villages because they don't know what they're looking for. They just know maybe one person that they were told by intelligence is North Vietnamese and he's living in your village. And they are going to kill everybody just to get to that one guy. I call that pretty dark. And they're not just doing it at one village. They're going from village to village on intelligence that they receive to do the same. Just because they want 1 or 2 people. And we're not just talking about adults or women. They were murdering the children too. I call that very dark. I call Agent Orange dark, but I think the murderings are the number one thing that I would pick. And that went on throughout the whole world.
True. And would you say that which side do you think was more desperate to win than the other, North Vietnamese or South Vietnamese?
Meaning who was worse?
Who was probably worse in your opinion?
Who were more likely to win, or Sure. More likely to win?
No, who you think was worse intention, more desperate to do actions that are not justified, but still did it?
I would say North Vietnamese is the true enemy because their actions against the South escalated the war and made the United States want to get involved. Because the initial combat was just skirmishes between North and South. But then they upped their tactics and started mass murderings, and the South started losing numbers. Now, we had already had relations to the South, so think about this. You're getting massacred and killed, and your ally is not in the war. You're going to come to your ally and say, we really need help. Now, is it really our war? No. But are we going to leave them hanging? Maybe. But we didn't.
True.
And we stayed in that war until the end.
But the thing is, we stayed to that war for the all wrong reasons.
What?
The purpose and the motivation for the war wasn't really a war to be glory for.
Well,
it was war and violence.
That depends on who you ask. If you ask the people that served, of course they're going to say it was a war. Because they served in it. They fought it. They died. People lost blood. But political, we shouldn't have not have been in it. Political, we felt we had to aid our allies. But in actuality, we didn't need to be in it. It was a true fight between the other two. I don't know why the president at that time decided, let's get involved. I'd like to say it was Nixon, but I could be wrong because it was during the 70s.
Okay. So what was the viewpoint for, like, say, the argument side, one point on the argument side and one argument on the pro side?
Like, what was the pivot point?
No, what was one argument on the argumentative side for not have the war, and one argument for the pro side to have the war?
North Vietnamese, I didn't really research into because we had no allies with them, and they were all
We'll go off the political. Go up the political real quick. One for self-govern and democracy, one for communism.
Well, I would like to say the biggest points here are the South wanted to maintain what we would call democracy, but the North were communists, and they were in line. I think they were in line with Russia, and at that time, Russia was not a democracy. It was I'm in charge, too bad, and they were trying to take over South Vietnam. So South Vietnam wants what is the equivalent of a democracy. They want to vote. They want a choice. North is communists, and they don't want to give them a choice. They want to force themselves on the South to conquest the land. That was the major conflict here. One side wanted to maintain independence, and the other side was trying to force them not to. Gee, that sounds familiar. And here comes the United States. I compare us to the French, because here we are being asked to take a side. And what did the French do during the colonial? They came into our rescue. We're coming into South Vietnam's rescue. So different sides, same principle. Except 1776, we were legit fighting for our freedom. There was no political parties at the time.
True. What is your belief on the stop to spread communism for the basis of
Stop to spread communism? Well, like I said, politically we shouldn't have been involved, but we also had to look at our global responsibility. What happens if the North Vietnamese had won? What do you think would have happened? They would have took over the world. And here they are trying to spread communism. So that means we would not be free right now. Because if they took over South Vietnamese, who are they coming for next? So without our help, South Vietnam would not exist. Because the South didn't have the manpower, the technology, the weapons to stand on their own. When we got involved, they were combating guerrilla warfare tactics. They didn't face the people face to face. So they would take them out through jumping out from like the woods, stabbing you in the back. It wasn't like a battlefield like it was the Civil War. It was underhanded tactics. and we're coming in and offer support. We have the Hueys, we had the missiles, we had the guns, we had the fire bases, all of the stuff the South Vietnamese did not have. So military-wise, yeah, we needed to be involved. Political, it was the dumbest mistake to get involved. So it depends on who or what you ask.
True. In the course of what you think of the war, what was the end result in the Vietnam War? Was there a sole winner, a ceasefire, or a stalemate?
Those questions are really hard, but I would think that if North Vietnamese did not take over everything, which we're free today, so I guess South won, I would think that they had come to an agreement with the South. Because my geography isn't that great, but I think there's two sides in Vietnam nowadays, so North and South. And if it's still there, I guess they found an agreement or something. Because I think we withdrew after we did our job and let them politically deal with themselves.
So do you feel like the end result of the Vietnam War was something that needed to happen? Like,
well, eventually, if
over?
I understand my history, eventually both sides got to a point where they were willing to talk. And the United States withdrew most of our troops. We left enough to police, not a lot. We left enough to police, keep the peace. And then the ambassadors were sent in, the politicians. Their goal was to help one side and the other come together. They were the mediators, which if you get to that point, it's a pretty positive thing that with our help, the mediators' help, they're going to find some way to get along.
Well, in the course of, we say, the dark history, what is your belief of American people when it first became on television as a first televised war?
Meaning, like, when we found out about the war and what we wanted? Well, the American people did not like Vietnam. They didn't want to be in Vietnam. They hated it. They did not agree with the president because Vietnam soldiers were coming home. This goes to your question, and being spit on. They had apples thrown at them because people at home that did not understand what was going on, they were judging them. Because the stories they heard was the U.S. were baby killers, murderers, over there to encourage the murders. That's not what we were. We were support staff. The real people killing children and murdering people was the North Vietnamese. Yes, our soldiers did do some massacres, but that was bad leadership and bad intelligence. And think about it, you're a soldier and your lieutenant tells you to kill and burn this whole village. Now your first reaction is to say, yes, sir, because that's what you're taught. Respect the officer and listen to him that is above you. Here's the problem. The officers were not really informed of everything they were supposed to be doing. They were told there is some intelligence or a North Vietnam agent at this village. We want him eliminated. Now, you got a young officer that hears the word elimination. Or what do you think is going to happen? This officer was just yanked out of OSC. He's thrown into combat and has no battle experience, has to rely on the sergeant. And the one thing he was told by his superior, we want that agent eliminated. And they didn't tell you how. So the lieutenant's going to say, level the village. It's the only way they can think, well, that's how we're going to do it. And what does the United States people think? We're murderers. So society and back home, they're judging us. The people over in Vietnam. So, no, I'm not eating. The overall effect was negative for that war compared to like World War II, where the people loved us. They have statues of them. They have them raising the flag in World War II. What did they give us when we came back home? Apples in the face, spit on, yelled at, cussed at, said that we are the reason, the soldiers are the reason that we even got in the war. The soldiers followed orders. I would say public reception was very negative. If you ask me the politicians, I can't answer that.
No. Do you think losing the support of having this war turned the tide, U.S. withdrawing prematurely to North Vietnamese taking the win? Or do you think North Vietnamese was just taking the win anyway?
You mean like, are we still on motivation or something else?
So, when U.S. pulled out because of the anti-support for the war, do you think that the North Vietnamese victory over the South was had to happen, was going to happen because of it?
Well, if you're asking that, what would happen if we didn't support, the South would have lost.
Yeah, but if we continue to support, what would have happened potentially?
If we didn't intend to, or if we did?
If we didn't withdraw the support, do you think the North Vietnamese would have the edge to unify the entire Vietnam?
Well, if they didn't withdraw when they did, I think the conflict could have continued because, yes, we were helping the South, but the North had no help. Russia did send them a little bit of support, but not many troops. It was resources. And I would like to think that Russia was on their downgrade. They were going downhill at this point because it was during, the 70s, the 80s, and Russia was fighting their own war. So they were slowly withdrawing. Now, if we stayed in, I think it would have continued because the North would think that we're also an enemy. But we withdrew and became a neutral party eventually. I think I can't remember when we got into the war. Hold on. Yeah, I think we got into the 70s because that war was already being fought in the 1950s. And it was just terrible. To your question, here's an example of what happened afterwards. Persecution. Many were forced to flee the country. Reunification. In recent times, like today, Vietnam is not a nice place because sexual exploitation, labor force, organ trade, and human trafficking. So that might answer a little bit of your questions. But see, we got into the war late. It has started in 1955. We got in, I believe, around 1960 or something. And the war ended into 1975. So we were in there for a while, but I think we withdrew after a while. I wasn't alive in the 75, so I'm relying on history. For anything, I think you could ask my neighbor. He serves in the Navy, anchors away.
Yeah. But I also, to sum it up, I say like Vietnam was a war that didn't need to happen. It needed to happen, but it was there for the wrong reasons. That's what I would say.
Well, we were over there again for the South Vietnamese. That's basically what we were there for. And you had a lot of atrocities being committed that a lot of people don't know about. And that makes it dark. Like, imagine being in the army back then and you end up killing a whole village under orders. I mean, I know you're a good person. You wouldn't do it like I wouldn't do it morally, but I'm being ordered to kill somebody. That's going to stick with you the rest of your life. Think about it. Several massacres by U.S. forces under orders. Now, do you think we really wanted to be in it? I didn't. I wouldn't. But we were following orders from our lieutenant because we're in the war. We don't want to be there. Do you really want to end up killing people? That's the dark history there. Thousands dead that didn't need be. If I remember the name right, and they made a movie about this, true story, we were soldiers, and I think that was called Dai Vang Valley, not alley. And it was the first time in Vietnam that we used air support, like cavalry and stuff like that. And the guy that actually fought it died in 2010. He died a colonel. If you haven't seen that movie, I would encourage you to watch it because you could see some very graphic stuff in that movie. And here's the thing, that's a good representation of what happened during the Vietnam War even if it was just one battle, the amount of bodies that we lost as soldiers. If you ever heard of Western Union was developed during the Vietnam War, not as a mail carrier, but as a death notification service.
Interesting. So it was oh, really?
Well, you asked about certain things in the darkness. Diving Valley is a good example because Western Union was created to notify bodies because we were rushed into that war and the army was not prepared. They were not prepared for the losses they received. They were not prepared for the duration, and they were not prepared on how to notify families that your son, husband, uncle, whatever, died. And I don't say daughter because during the 70s, women could not serve. That's a good example. That movie, I've seen it hundreds of times, is a good example to answer your question. And the guy that commanded that, the 7th Cavalry, the 7th is cursed. Here's a quiz for you. Civil War. Who commanded the 7th? Custer.
Gotcha.
And he was killed at Little Bighorn.
Vietnam War. One thing you want the audience to know about the dark history of it and the sides of the battle in which each side fought on.
I'm sorry, what is the second question is what?
What do you want the audience to know of the dark history of the war they haven't mentioned yet, or we elaborate on and conclude?
What do I think? The end of it or the reason or...
That's the closing statement you want to give.
I personally think that the end didn't justify the means, but we've covered the darkness. You really wanted to focus on Agent Orange. Do you still want to talk about that?
No, we did.
Okay. What else? What other points did you have? Because I forgot. You said dark history.
That is pretty much the dark history of Vietnam War. We went over the different political struggles, the Agent Orange as a tactic that involved other daily life, seeing your inner
You want to
what they could be, and pretty much the sides in which each side had in influence of spreading communism and having self-government and a democracy. So that's the political clash and the propaganda that was for the war and against the war.
Exactly.
So that concludes this recording. Thank you for being here, and it was nice having you. But yeah, that concludes this episode. And Dark History of Vietnam is done. Bye, guys.
This concludes another episode of MC Anime Podcast. MC Anime Podcast is available on podcast directories like Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. We also have our website at mcanimepodcast.com. If you want to directly support us, then follow Patreon blog MC Anime. Finally, if you want services for hire, then we're available on Fiverr for audio and video production, graphic design, idea consulting, and blog and article writing.